Hey everybody, and welcome to Prime Time with Sean Mooney. We've got another great episode coming your way, coming off our conversation with James Storm. I hope that you really enjoyed that. It is a crazy time with what's happening with the coronavirus and everybody self-distancing and self-quarantining. I hope you are staying safe, and I hope you're caring for all the people that you love and trying to help those here in your community when you can. But man, it's scary times, and I'm glad to see that, as usual, folks here in our great country are coming together. We'll get through this, no problem with that, but I hope in the meantime we can help entertain you somewhat with this podcast. And I hope the one with James Storm, I mean, what an incredible talent he is, and he just keeps getting it done. Now with the NWA, and still at it. And we'll be hearing a lot more from him, I know, in the future, and we'll have him back. This episode is also a great one, man. I just had this conversation with the developers of Dark Side of the Ring, director Jason Eisener and producer Evan Husney. And guys, this is a really great talk that we had. Episode 2 is just about to premiere. For many of you listening right now, you're catching this right before it debuts. And they've got a great lineup of new documentaries, a new series, 10 different episodes coming up. They released part 1 of the Chris Benoit story on YouTube. So maybe if you don't have Vice, you can see it. Maybe I don't want you to get Vice after you see it, because it is just awesome. I watched it yesterday, and what an incredible story as you see, one of the greatest superstars ever in the WWE just spiral to the point where he reaches the darkest part a human can go, where he ends up killing his wife and son, and then and killing himself. And what's really great about it, though, is that Chris Benoit, who is the narrator of this series, says, if you think that this story is some one that's going to glorify a murder, stop watching. That's not what this is about. And you're going to really, I can't wait to see the second part of it. But there's also so many other great episodes that are coming up. They got the assassination of Dino Bravo, and that I worked with Dino, I knew him very well, and it's still a cold case. They have not solved it. And when I talked with Jason and Evan, they discussed how they didn't get cooperation from law enforcement, and they actually got his widow to talk to them, and it's just fascinating. New Jack, which is an episode that I don't know much about New Jack, but after they told me about what the story contains, and they actually have him, it's fascinating. Dr. David Schultz, Dr. D, is somebody they say on here is a cautionary tale, that he is the one who, gave John Stossel the ear claps and, burst his eardrums and whatever, and they actually got him, Stossel, to talk to them for that episode, and it's just fascinating to think that here's this guy who's defending professional wrestling in his eyes, and it ends up basically turning its back on him, and that was, ended his career. The death of Nancy Argentino is another one, with Jimmy Snuka. The Road Warriors, which is personal for both Jason and Evan. They're huge Road Warrior fans, and the story with Mike Hegstrand and Joe Laurinaitis. Herb Abrams is another one of the episodes, a guy who was kind of the Vince McMahon wannabe. And then the one that I cannot wait to see is the episode on Owen Hart. But there's 2 hours of this episode coming up here where they break down what it took to produce this series. So what do you say we get to it, all right? Here are the creators of The Dark Side of the Ring. We've got the director, who is Jason Eisener, and the producer, Evan Husney. And they tell you the story of how they got these 10 episodes done. Ding, ding, ding. Folks, I am really excited to welcome back my guests, the creators of The Dark Side of the Ring, which has become one of my all-time favorite, by far, documentary series when it comes to wrestling and just sports. I'm not even saying sports entertainment, just sports. Director Jason Eisener and producer Evan Husney join me. And guys, welcome back. I know you've been a little bit busy, but tell me what the last, I don't know, since we last chatted, what's happened?
Oh man, I don't even know where to start. I guess I think we spoke after the first season was done, right? After it
Yeah,
aired,
you
I
were,
think.
and you couldn't make the announcement. I think you knew you had a second season coming,
Oh,
but I don't think you could make it official. And I think we actually waited a week or so that I could come on and say it was coming.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. So right after the first season aired, we got the green light to go ahead on a season 2, and we've been hitting the ground running pretty much ever since that day, probably. I think we got the news, like we got the official email that season 2 is happening. I think we were out the door filming within a week or two. Like,
it was literally, we got to Toronto and then had like
we didn't even get to Toronto.
Oh, that's right. We didn't. We just
we didn't even go to Toronto.
Yeah. And then after doing the first round of shooting, we came to Toronto, linked back up with the team again, and dove back into it. But Evan, actually, I think you tallied all the interviews we've done for season 2 yesterday, didn't you?
I did, yeah. Yesterday, all the number of interviews that we've done for this season is actually 87 interviews.
Wow. That's unbelievable.
And usually like each one is like 3 to 4 hours long. Right. And I was just thinking like on the way back home today, I was just like, man, if someone had told me this year you're going to do 87 interviews that are going to be each 3 to 4 hours long, it's like, whoa, that is so daunting.
That is crazy. And when you think about it, when you guys think about it, if anyone knows how you kind of do this situation, but you have to be thinking way ahead. And you guys have 10 episodes coming up, and I'm sure a lot of these guys that you got could speak on a number of these. And so you've got to think ahead. How in the world did you do that as far as your prep going into this and being able to say, okay, we're going to get him, so we got to be sure and ask him about this?
Well, sometimes we got a little lucky in that way, but I mean, having done the first season, there's a couple of people we knew we wanted to have back, and then I guess I think it was right after when we got the green light, we went straight to try and figure out what the 10 episodes would be, and we tried to decide on those as quickly as possible because of that fact, because then we would be traveling and talking to these people, and then we knew we could get Jim Ross to talk about a handful of different things, because obviously he's been around for all of it. Or, I'm trying to think of some others, and obviously Jim Cornette's a regular on the show. So we knew we wanted to get as much out of him as we could. And we actually went down to him, I think 3 times this year.
Yeah.
If I'm correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was 3 times, right? Yeah. Yeah. Well, so so it was just, it's just trying to plan as much as you can, but you're always at the mercy of the edit schedule. So whatever the edit schedule tells you that you can do, then that's how you kind of shape everything around that.
Yes.
So with that in mind, and Jason, maybe you can address this first, but how in the world did you guys decide which stories you're going to tell? I know there were a few from the last season.
Yeah.
And maybe, Evan, you want to address it as well, but how did you go about that? Because I have to imagine there were a lot of stories that you could have told.
Yeah, well, basically, once we we knew that we were possibly going to get this green light, we just hit our social media accounts on Twitter and just asked the audience what subjects would they like to see in season 2, and we just got a flood of feedback, so much, and Evan went through all of it for days and painstakingly ordered it, and that's how we kind of came up with the our decision for each episode. Obviously we weren't able to get into every single topic, but for the most part all of our episodes were the top picks from the audience.
Yeah, it was it was thousands and thousands of replies that we got on all the social media platforms. And I just was I just thought, what would it look like? What is the top 10? And it was fascinating to see what the commonalities people had. Obviously, there's some obvious ones that people wanted to see, which we did do, but we tried to keep it as close as we could to what people most wanted to see, and that was really informative and super helpful. And obviously, there's episodes we personally wanted to do, but there was also I don't know if there's maybe a few episodes we might not have done if it wasn't for this overwhelming, audience feedback.
Really?
Yeah.
So, I mean, and starting at the beginning of this, and of course the premiere, folks, happening, and I'm glad that we got you guys right before it happened. We're going to drop this episode right before, and geez, you talk about timing as well. If people got to be locked up indoors, what a great way to be entertained, especially if you're a wrestling fan. But the Benoit story, the Chris Benoit story. And it's just been, such a mystery over the years. Even people who knew what happened, there was always this why. And so, was that your number one right away, saying that's going to be the first one we do, or was that farther down the list?
Well, the Chris Benoit story was one that we actually thought we would tackle in season 1, and we originally were supposed to have 10 episodes for season 1, but the episode order got cut halfway through production down to 6. So it kind of went automatically on the shelf, and I'm really glad that it did, because I don't think that we were ready to tell that story. I don't think we were ready to handle that story. I just couldn't see how we would have done it then. And back then, while we were sort of prepping to do it, like if we were going to do it for season 1, I had made a contact with Chavo Guerrero Jr. Was the first person I reached out to about it. And he was just like he was such a great guy, such an amazing guy.
Yeah.
And he saw our Bruiser Brody episode and really liked it and believed in us to be able to tell the story. And so I started developing a relationship with him. And then after season 1 aired, after season 1 was finished, in between it airing and it being finished, we kind of messed around with the idea of actually developing the Chris Benoit story, with somebody else. Like what if we don't get a season 2? We felt like it could be something we could do somewhere else in a different way. And so we had been thinking about this story and researching it and developing it for months and months and months before we even started work on season 2. So we had a big head start on thinking about it and developing relationships. And so as soon as we got the green light, we hit the ground running with Chavo, and Chavo was just instrumental in introducing us to all the key players of the story, the people that really this affected in major ways, and we could not have done it without him. He's actually a producer on the episode with us.
Yeah.
So he
really?
Yeah. So but Jason, if you want to throw down on that.
Yeah, well, Chavo is extremely important and integral to it. He even came with us when we did the interviews with Chris Benoit's son, David Benoit, and Nancy Benoit's sister, Sandra. And Chavo was there to be an emotional support as well too, and to just help give guidance and be there for Sandra and David through the process of telling the story. And so Chavo was just absolutely incredible to work with, and like Evan said, he opened all the doors for us to be able to tell this story.
Imagine
he
was.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say that. Okay. Go ahead, Jason or Evan.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say that it was also kind of a big seal of approval in terms of him being a part of the project as well. I think a lot of people involved in the project, it just really made the whole thing feel like this was the story being told by the inner circle. We're all coming together to kind of tell the story together. So there was a very kind of unified feeling between everybody in it, and I think that was largely because of Chavo and creating that environment,
Yeah.
So you mentioned the emotional support there. How difficult was it for those two, especially in this particular story? Because I don't imagine that they had opened up like this before. How like you said, it was like to go through the process, and as you mentioned there, Jason, that it sounds like that was an experience in itself.
Yeah, it probably was one of the most powerful experiences I've ever been around, especially in this line of work. Just seeing how Sandra and David were just like how they talk about it and how they're so like open to express their feelings about it is just incredibly brave. Like I've never been around a situation like that before, where people are talking about something that has affected their lives so much, and in such a terrible way, but to like talk about it so openly so that we could all better kind of understand where they're coming from, and just having like I think like a better understanding of the whole situation, you know.
Well, yeah, and to add on to that too, I think what also made it so powerful, and also in the episode as well, and something you'll learn by seeing it, is that, you know, since the tragedy, since the events happened, you know, David and Sandra hadn't had much of a relationship or stayed in contact very much after that happened, and so this, you know, with you know, Chris Jericho played a huge role in kind of reconnecting them. I think about, memory serves me correct, either a year or two ago ish, but they hadn't actually been in the same room as each other since we did the filming. Like when we did the filming, that was the first time they'd been in the same room with each other since, for I think 13 years. So it was just a really bringing all those emotions back for them was really heavy. But at the same time, I think the effect it's had, I think, for most people involved in the project, I don't want to speak for them, but just from from observing, it seems that it's been very cathartic to be able to get it off your chest, to talk about it in a safe platform, and you know, and I think that's a good thing, and that's a positive thing, because the story has been, in the wrestling world, been this thing that's just, you know, the thing you don't talk about, and the thing you don't explore, you know, because it's either yeah.
So you know, the years have passed. I mean, it has been a while. Had they come, in your opinion, to any kind of peace or conclusion about why it happened? Because I know that is the biggest question. Everybody going into watching this is, did they find an answer?
Well, I think that it's hard to speak for them in that regard. I don't think so. It's just, I think it's just one of those things that's so complicated in terms of like the myriad of reasons why. And I think one of the things that we wanted to show with our story is that, you know, as we look back at this story 13 years later, you just look that it's a lot of different pieces, a lot of different elements coming together that probably that can form a conclusion as to why this happened. It's not just one particular thing. You can't just blame steroids like the media did, and, you know, originally, or you can't just blame, you know, maybe you necessarily can't just blame CTE, you know, because now that we have a much more robust understanding of emotional mental health issues as well, which is a huge thing that Chris was suffering, you know, and so much grief that he and Nancy both were going through with the loss of so many colleagues during that time,
right.
You know, and so it's just so many different things. When you add all these little elements together, something transpired in that weekend, which caused just a total absolute breakdown. And you know, and it's hard to pinpoint one specific thing, I think.
Yeah, but you'll see too, it's like the story is very much like about like a healing process, and that, you know, the healing process is still happening and will continue to, you know, happen, and you're getting to see some of that process through, I think, through our episode.
You know, and this episode is two parts. And why the need for that as producers you felt that? And then also, how is one different from the other? As far as it just a continuing part of the story, or is it a different perspective?
Well, when I was mentioning earlier that we were developing it on the side prior to season 2, right. We just, in researching the story, there was just no way we could tell the story in an hour, just because it's so massive in terms of just all the different details. And so when we presented it to Vice that we wanted to do it for season 2, it was like, guys, if we're going to do it, we need to have at least 2 hours. to tell the story. So the episode is actually going to air on television, essentially as one long film. Is how you're going to see it. You're going to see it as basically I think it's just under 90 minutes because there's commercial time. Right. Adds up to being 2 hours of television. But so we just knew that we needed that amount of time in order to fully explore this story, so you can get the setup of who Chris was, who are the different characters that have come in and out of this story, how our interview subjects relate to the story, why they're so intimate into this story. And so you really can understand what happened and really feel the loss of what happened and also, and all that stuff. So it was just something that we knew we needed to have 2 hours. Like it'd be impossible to do in 1 hour, I think.
Yeah. And I tell you what just adds to the intrigue of it is, like I said before, that, Chris Benoit has basically been disappeared. You don't see him in anything related to the WWE. You go on the network, they actually have, points where you blatantly see that he's disappeared from that clip. So I think that's really piqued people's interest. And before we talk about some of the other episodes, you had mentioned that maybe you guys weren't ready to do it then. And I'm wondering what part of it is that people seeing that first season, especially people you want to talk to, saw those and said, you know what, these guys know what they're doing. Yeah. And I think that they can tell the story the right way. How much did that come into play for this second season?
Oh, so much. Like Evan said, like even just getting the connection with Chavo. I remember I went to LA to the Vice LA offices and showed him the Bruiser Brody episode. And afterwards, he was just so taken back by it. And his father was friends with Bruiser Brody. And so he knew all the stories. And I think like he was just really impressed how we kind of, I think, like got the nuances of like the blurred lines between, fiction and wrestling fiction and reality, right. And I think he just thought we balanced it so well, and he thought it was like a perspective into the wrestling world that was much needed, and that we got it in a sense, and that really earned his trust, and and that always like that Bruiser Brody episode really always like kind of helped us along the way. Even when we were trying to when we were with Kevin Von Erich and his family, and we were trying to get him on board with like our vision as to what the show was going to be, we just showed him a clip from the Bruiser Brody episode, and like he instantly got like this like obscure reference that we had for the whole show, which was Errol Morris's documentary film, The Thin Blue Line. And when he saw the Bruiser Brody clip, he was like, "Oh, this is just like the Thin Blue Line," and he like got it, and he understood like what it was we were trying to do, and just I think the success of the first season and for people seeing what we did help.
Definitely,
Yeah, and I think another thing that really stands out is you two are wrestling fans at heart, and there's a respect for the business. And I think that when someone would hear something like Dark Side of the Ring, it's like, oh boy, they're gonna tear down this business, and make it. and really, but you humanize these guys. You bring across that they're like everyone else, and these are guys that people just idolized. But they had their failings too, and that's what I think that really comes through a real respect for wrestling, and that's what I think that's led to the success so far. I don't know the order of these. I hope that we're the way they're lined up here, but it doesn't matter. One I cannot wait to see is the assassination of Dino Bravo. Because I worked with Dino quite a bit back in the 80s. We talked about, and I know this is something you wanted to do last season. So tell me about putting this one together and how the story all played out.
Well, the Dino Bravo episode was one that we filmed a majority of during season one. Actually, right. It was one of the episodes that unfortunately had to be put on the back burner if and when we got another season. But it's such a fascinating story in terms of, when you look at, here's a wrestler who in his prime was a huge star in Montreal, where he's from. And then he comes to the WWF more towards the end of his career. And he doesn't quite make a huge impression on the world stage with the WWF. And then he gets let go, and he doesn't really have a backup plan in place for his post wrestling kind of career. And he has a a lifestyle that he's used to, a level of income that he's used to, and he's looking to supplement that. And he turns to the world of organized crime, or illicit business, and that's basically the most of what we know, in terms of where he turned after wrestling. And then he kind of went down this path, unfortunately, that wound up being his ultimate demise, where he was actually executed. He was killed in his home, when his family was away. And then it kind of just left this mystery. I mean, it basically was covered in the newspapers like once or twice when it happened, like locally, and then no evidence really, like no real concrete evidence of who did it, and why came out after that. Like, it was basically just kind of faded away. And so what we wanted to do with the episode is we wanted to obviously touch on his wrestling career, because it's not one that a lot of modern day fans know about. And then we also wanted to, speak to his family. So you're going to see his widow, and you're going to see his daughter in the episode, and they talk about Dino as a father and as a husband. And then we just talked to a lot of the wrestlers who kind of came up in the business with him, and then also a couple of experts in terms of what the organized crime world was like in Montreal at the time, because it was a hotbed for that. And the other fascinating thing about the case is that the case is still open. The case has never been closed. It's still a cold case. So unlike some of the other episodes that we deal with, this one we didn't get any cooperation from the authorities. So whatever information they have is something that's inaccessible to us. So we basically were just on our own doing our own detective work in terms of piecing together kind of what happened. But it was a tricky one because of that fact. Yeah. And a lot of people don't necessarily want to open up to you when it involves organized crime. Let's just say.
Yeah, is that and did you guys experience that? Why you think it was that? I mean, after all this time, that law enforcement there would not want to help. Is it? You think there's because of the connections? After all this time, or?
I think just because of like on the end of the law enforcement, like the actual reason they give is that it's still an open case. Yeah. So they can't give you information or anything, and it is the Canadian.
But they know, don't you think? They know. I mean, who's behind it? They may not have the guy who pulled the trigger, because it's rumored that he knew the guy because the guy got in the house, whoever it was didn't break a door down, didn't come in through a window. So it's that you think that had a lot to do with it, with the connections there.
I mean, it's tricky, because what we tried to do is we tried to look at, because basically, like, the most prevailing theory is just that he was involved in the smuggling of contraband cigarettes, essentially.
Cigarettes, yeah, right.
Which was an operation that involved a lot of different groups, across the border and also in Quebec. So when you look at like who's responsible, it's really tricky, because it could involve one of 3 or 4 different groups, or like a couple of groups in tandem with each other, and one puts out a hit and then the other executes hit. So it's like a dizzying, kind of mob tragedy story mixed up with wrestling. It's kind of like a film noir story almost. Mm-hmm. Of this guy who once was this great wrestler, and then he has this downfall and a hail of bullets. It's wild.
Well, you have to wonder too, because Dino was a huge popular figure there. I mean, huge. Hulk Hogan had to lose to him to get out of town.
There's incredible stories in Montreal too that you hear of like he was like a massive Montreal Canadiens fan. To the point where he got, I think, his like season tickets right behind the box of the Quebec Nordiques, who were the rivals of the Montreal Canadiens, and he hated the Quebec Nordiques. And there's like some story written about in Montreal where he got in like in a physical like altercation with the coach of the Quebec Nordiques like during a hockey game. And there's a really great story where he fights a Quebec Nordiques hockey player in our episode.
Yeah,
Oh,
you'll see
boy.
that.
I can't wait to hear that. You said you talked with his family members. How did you arrange that, and what was that experience like? Because I would wonder if they were at least hesitant to talk initially, or how did that all happen?
Yeah. Yeah, basically, when we filmed it originally in season 1, this year we shot new interviews for it, but when we shot it originally, we had talked to Dino's daughter, who was open with us. We actually went out to Montreal and hung out with her, I believe, for on a trip with no cameras, which is something that we also do a lot. And she was great. She's amazing. She's super, super cool. She looks just like Dino, actually, too. You'll see in the episode. And she was super, super cool. And then, but she told us originally that her mother was very hesitant to participate. She hasn't really done any interviews. I think she's only ever done one interview in like a local paper on the story. And so she had never done it. And then when we came back around for season 2, it was kind of like, can we just ask your mom one more time, like, and see if maybe she'd be into it? And then we actually were able to make that happen. And she did finally do the interview with us, which added so much to the story, because you really realize that, you know, their relationship and what their relationship was like, and how they really didn't hide much from each other. And that's kind of a shocking thing, was that they both, you know, were kind of aware of the world he was getting into. But ultimately, you know, there's aspects of, I think, him being a little in over his head or whatever, you know, but it just adds so much to the story to be able to have someone who knew him so closely and observed this kind of happening, you know. So that just added so much. It just adds so much to the story to have that.
Yeah, and when you get to see Dino, like the being like a family man and a father, and a husband, and that's just like a side like you've never seen before of Dino
you wouldn't
Bravo.
think you'd see.
Yeah, and it's like, it's very genuine and it's very sweet. Like when you see the photos of Dino and his daughter at like Disneyland together, and just like it's like it's really sad, but
it's a tragedy. And that's it sounds, at least what you're saying, that he didn't really get deeply involved in this type of business until later. He did have family connections, and did he have any dealings with them earlier on when he was wrestling? Because I think I told you guys before, he always seemed trouble to me. I mean, he always he chewed his nails, I just remember, and thinking, wow, God, here's this guy this big, and he just always seemed at ill at ease, and like something was troubling him. So I'm really interested to find out more about that and what else was going on in his life then.
Yeah, totally. You will definitely see some of that, and I mean that is one of the pieces of it, is that through marriage, his family was basically married into the mob, essentially. But it also could be one of the more misleading parts of the story, because there are other players. There are other players and other gangs and other outfits that were dealing in this kind of trade. And so it's hard to know. It's hard to know where the connection exactly comes from, but also it is a coincidence. There could be a coincidence, or it could not be a coincidence.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, I can't wait to see that episode. I don't know. Is it going to be the second episode? Because I don't care. I'll be watching all of them. But it's tough to keep them straight, because the way in which we produce them doesn't wind up being the episode order, and I haven't fully memorized what the episode ordering is. Yeah. But I think it's in the middle. I think it's like in the middle of the run. Okay. Yeah. I can wait a little longer if I have to.
The other ones are good too.
Yeah, really? I have a feeling they are. I'll just go down the list of the Brawl for All, and we don't have to talk a whole lot about this, but it was certainly an interesting experiment, I think we'll call it. But when I heard about this, I was thinking, isn't there somebody who's raising his hand saying, guys, this is not a good idea?
That's kind of what the episode's about.
Yeah.
Like, nobody just didn't say anything? I mean,
I don't know. I was saying this the other day, and I've gotten a lot of messages and a lot of tweets and DMs or whatever about this episode of like, what's dark about the Brawl for All, or people really like, saying like, like one of these isn't like the other, in terms of this, why we picked this story, and or like, how'd you get an hour out of the Brawl for All? And for me, I'm like, if you look outside of the wrestling bubble, it's a dark story, man, because you have these guys. I mean, wrestlers, as we know, risk their bodies so much, for this business. It's such a high risk business, and it doesn't always reward the person in the ring, right? So when you look at this as like, okay, you have this ratings war between these two companies. How are we going to get the edge? How are we going to make money? And and then of course we have all this talent that we're not using and who's underutilized. Let's kind of dangle a carrot and say, hey, you guys want to get in there and fight for real, and bring guys completely out of their element, and they kind of really don't know what they're getting involved in. And then you just see basically these guys like colleagues, like, actual work colleagues getting in there and just smacking each other in the face and getting horrifyingly injured, knocked out, injured, things, being retired, and all this stuff. And it's really dark to watch because it really feels like, it just, I don't know, something about it makes me feel uneasy, the whole concept of it. But at the same time, I think it also deals with one of the themes that we look at, which is when the concept of reality and wrestling kind of intertwine and it becomes this weird avant-garde theater. And this is really kind of one of those moments.
Yeah, and to like ask your audience to like believe in these like work matches, and then all of a sudden throw like a real like shoot fight amongst them is just such a weird way to.
I remember watching it when it came on here. I remember when it was on TV and be like, I don't understand what's happening right now.
Are they trying to destroy their business at the same time? But it's like it's a car wreck. It's going to Indy and just waiting for the pileup, because it's just going to get uglier. And it's almost where, and then they were into it, and what they had to say, this is off, but we got to finish it.
We got to see it through. And that's the other thing too about it that is cinematic, like cinematically tragic, is when you look at the story. It's like, I could see this in a movie too. It's like you have a guy like Bart Gunn, spoiler alert, he wins the tournament, but you have a guy who like they didn't plan on winning, and
no one believed in him. Like no one thought like could possibly not go to any of these guys.
Which is a great underdog story, but he like gets in, he beats everybody, he knocks everybody out, he wins. And then he thinks that like, okay, well, this was my moment to become a star, right? And they're like, no, you're going to sit at home. And then, we got this opportunity for you at WrestleMania. How about like getting your head like caved in by this guy named Butterbean, and like destroying. We're
just going to completely destroy you, and then even make it look worse. Like here you went and you just breezed through all these guys, and then he comes in and just lights out. I mean, it is all that is a car wreck. I can't wait to see that one either, because it's just like somebody needed to stop it. Somebody needed to throw a towel in somewhere, and it just
towels
never happened. Yeah. All right. The other one I'm really interested too is New Jack, because I know nothing about New Jack. I really didn't know anything about his career.
Well, then I'm very excited for you to see it and react to it. That I think is the second episode, if I'm not correct. If I think that's the second one in the airing order.
And why New Jack? What was it that intrigued you guys so much about this story?
Well, it was real high up on the request list.
Really?
Yeah, and I don't think it was one that we ever really considered doing necessarily. Like, like in the right, like it was kind of off our. I mean, I knew New Jack growing up, and like but.
It was like a lot of people wanted us to do the story of mass transit, and it was like, can that like story last like an hour? But then we realized there's not only the story of mass transit. There's all these other major events in his life that are equally or even more crazy than the mass transit.
Yeah.
Well, do you know what the mass transit incident is, Sean?
No.
Okay. Yeah, well, maybe we should explain
Sorry.
it. I mean, yeah, it's basically this very crazy moment that happened in ECW where they were doing they had a local match in Massachusetts, and there was this basically novice wrestler, maybe wrestled a handful of times. He was this kid, I think he was like 17 or something, and he lied about his age and said he was like 20 something, and he basically talked his way onto the card. And when one of the ECW wrestlers couldn't make the show, and then they basically booked him in a match with New Jack, and this kid being super green, he goes up to New Jack and he's like, "Hey, my dad's in the audience. Do you mind if I get a couple of good shots in on you? Can I put you through a table?" And New Jack, being New Jack, is like, hell
yeah. And he wanted to get color as well too.
Oh yeah, he wanted to get blood in the match, and he's like, I've never done it myself, and I'm wondering if you do it for me. And then New Jack's like, I got you. And then basically in the middle of this match, he beats this kid to a pulp, and then he basically cuts his like forehead like this, and like it's this crazy violent assault in the ring. And it escalated to a court case. It became something that was on local news and everything, and it became this kind of thing. And for us, it's a story to look at of like, where do you draw the line between like working in the ring and like actually assaulting somebody, right. And then then we kind of look into if there's some pattern behavior in that regard with New Jack and some other matches, and but also at the same time, he comes from this really difficult past, and then him coming up through the business in Smoky Mountain Wrestling as this extremely provocative, cutting edge, socio-political satire character of he's basically playing this character that's like born out of like gangster rap and like the LA riot scene, and it's kind of an amazing commentary on all of that at the same time, intentional or not. And he's just one of the more cutting edge characters in 90s wrestling, I think. Yeah. And then it just kind of escalates into his whole story, just escalates into these moments in the ring that you won't believe that happened between him and other people. So he was
well known for destroying people, but at the same time, there is, like you talk about, blurring that line. Mm-hmm. Obviously that line wasn't that blurry for him, but at the same time though, there is that kind of unwritten law. If somebody goes in there and they don't respect the business, or if you're an idiot enough of a fan to step into the ring, whatever happens to you in there it ain't against the law because you stepped in.
Right, exactly. So that episode is it's definitely, I think, one of my low-key favorite episodes that we've done so far. Just because his interview is incredible.
Oh, it's so good.
One of the best interviews.
He's very open about everything. And
he's such a good interview.
He's a great storyteller too.
He's a good storyteller. And it was just, it's really good. And there's just an interesting cast of characters in the episode that you'll see.
Awesome. How did he defend that? Or did he? Or how did he...
well, it's not really
too much away.
Yeah, it's not really his style to defend it. I mean, it's that's kind of one of the things. I think what I'll say without really spoiling it is just that it's really where does it end between him being Jerome Young, that's his real name, and where does the line between Jerome Young start or that end and New Jack start? And it's kind of like, at some point in time, did New Jack take over Jerome Young? And I think that's really kind of one of the things that we look at in the episode.
Yeah, he even said to us, he's like, I came into this building as New Jack, and I'll leave this building as New Jack.
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
Still there.
Cool.
Well, another one that's right along those lines is Dr. David Schultz, who was another guy that, I know his story pretty well. And, of course, if mainstream with John Stossel, they still talk about that to this day. But there's a lot more to Dr. David Schultz than just that story, because not only leading up to that, but here you have somebody who felt that he was defending the business, and then it basically turns its back on him.
I mean, that's basically it. I mean, it's the it's the fall guy story of wrestling. Here's a guy who's wrestling's greatest defender during the Kayfabe era. And, basically no one would defend that wrestling better than him in a lot of ways, because he is one of the realest wrestlers out there, one of the most believable wrestlers out there, and then of course, he's caught up in this whole controversy and this whole moment with John Stossel, where he slaps John Stossel for asking him if, saying that he thinks wrestling is fake. Yeah. And then of course, when lawsuits happen and when certain things happen, Schultz winds up kind of being the fall guy for it. And so that for us that's funny, because that episode wasn't one that was requested by fans. How we came to that one was I got 2 separate phone calls from 2 different people who basically told me, David Schultz is ready to talk now. Dr. D is ready to tell the story now.
David Schultz.
Yeah. And like, oh, really? And then it was kind of like that. He came to us, actually, which was really cool. So then it was like, all right. And he's one of 2 people that came to us to do a story this season. And that was great. And so then we just, and Jason and I traveled down to remote Tennessee to where he lives, and it was an unforgettable experience.
Oh yeah, it was incredible. He has like this whole compound that he has set up that him and his wife live on. It's like totally off the grid, and they've got these like really cool like storage lockers just filled with like amazing like wrestling memorabilia from like his past. And he was just such a trip. He was just like so wise, and for us to just be with anyone who was like really good friends with like Bruiser Brody and walk around with him during that time period and that era of wrestling is just like, I don't know, to me that's kind of like, it's like a gift, and it was like really special for like just to spend like 2 days with him and just like hear his stories, and then just talk. Like he was one of the few people that we did get to spend like actually like 2 days with. And so we just got to talk about a lot of things other than wrestling, and just like his perspective on life. And he just lives like a really good life. He's just like really healthy. He works like, nonstop. Works like throughout the night. His like hours are like from like it's like 10 until like 6 a.m. He's
doing what?
Well, he's like a 6th or 7th generation cotton picker. Like his like cotton picking is like was always in his family, and that's what he still does like to this day. So
drives trucks. He drives trucks, and he's just like, the way that he comes off in the episode, it's like he's just this incredible, likable, wise guy. It's really? very so contrasted, I think, from what you remember him as from that moment and from other moments. He just comes off as a very chilled out, kind of like wise in his older years, and he's really cool. He's just so cool.
Yeah,
so
he
cool.
kind of looks like the Moses of wrestling right now.
He does.
Like when you see him, he's just like has this huge white beard and all this white hair, but he's like he's super healthy and just like so
super cool,
quick-witted. He's awesome.
And the one thing I will say, just real quick on that, to tie the knot on that, is it's also exciting because you're going to be able to hear from John Stossel on that episode as well. So
really, he can't. Yeah, that's awesome. And so all this time later, how is since you did speak with Stossel too, I'd like to hear what you gathered from him. But does David Schultz feel that the business betrayed him? Is he let it go? How is that set with him?
I think it's definitely something that still weighs on him for sure. It's I think wrestling what is his passion, even if he sometimes wakes up one day and tells you it's not. I think it is. I think it is the thing that was the most important to him, that he was the best at, and gave him so much. And I think he does feel betrayed, and I think he is kind of a victim of circumstance and of his time, like obviously, like it'd be so different now, like obviously it's just such a different time period. It's like he was right on that cusp between when the WWF was like still that kind of like, not operating on major television, and like, it wasn't quite the cartoon like for kids Like, you know what I mean? Like, it was still in that transition from territory era to the mainstream. And he falls like right on that line. And I don't think that David is necessarily would have been the guy that would have fit really well with that era of the WWF. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't think he would have, because I don't think he would have liked where it would have gone, you know? So I think he's a little bit of a victim of his time and circumstance, but in his prime, you know, one of the best. And he did comment on, you know, that this whole thing that happened made him really lose the thing that he cares the most about. You know, I mean, that is what happened, you know? So.
And how about Stossel?
Man, it's going to be fun for you to see him.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm just astounded that he agreed to talk about it.
Yeah, he's great in it.
He's good in it. He's a good heel in the episode for sure.
Is he?
Yeah, he's a little bit of a heel in there, but he's also like, you know, it's just like I just remember when we were filming it and be like, oh boy, this is going to be real good to cut from David to John to David to John. And just to hear how this whole thing kind of unfolds, so that's really entertaining.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. And I really find it very interesting how you talk about that. That was a time that, you know, it was changing, and I came in. I was somebody from the outside. I mean, I was clearly, and you know, the kayfabe world still existed very much so.
Right. Yeah. Right.
You know, and with the Carney, you'd walk in the locker room initially, and before I was let into the brotherhood.
The brotherhood.
Yeah, they would, you know, start speaking Carney or whatever, and there were a lot that even when it happened, and they knew, you know, they always transitioned because you had to keep making a living, but you know, it never set well with them. And and they loved the fact that it was that kind of a world that they lived in, that nobody else, that you had to really fight your way in, and to see other people be able to slip through that door without paying the price that they had.
Right. And that's another part of the story too.
Yeah.
And also one of the other things about it too is very interesting, as you look at the history of kind of the mindset that if the business is exposed by the media, it's going to affect our business monetarily. Like it's going to be, people aren't going to want to see it anymore, you know, which obviously Vince McMahon proved everyone wrong in that regard, you know, but for decades and decades and decades, that was the belief, because when wrestling was exposed in New York mainstream newspapers in the 30s, I think it was the late 30s, when it was exposed as a hoax and you're getting cheated out of your money, Madison Square Garden didn't book wrestling for like 15 plus years, maybe even more, you know? So that was the belief that these guys carried around for so many years, was like, I have to maintain this or else it's going to affect the way that I eat and make money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The episode, and I'm really amazed that you were able to put this together, and I'm interested to see how deep you were able to go is with Jimmy Snuka, because up until his death, it was still, he did it. I don't know, you know, and they, I think, were ready to press charges, but he was, you know, not there anymore, even though he was breathing. So, how did you guys put that one together, and who did you get to talk to?
It's I mean, Jason, I mean, we're in the middle of just putting the finishing touches on it.
I literally just ran from editing that over here, so
it's fresh in our minds.
Yes.
And then after this we got to go right back to, because we got to fix that one. It's one of the most complicated stories, I think. Wouldn't you say it's the most complicated story of the season? Maybe.
It is. Yeah,
it is, because I think it has the most people. Maybe the Benoit episode does, because it's so long. But I think it might have the most people that we've interviewed for this episode. And it's basically just like, and it's also sobering to look at, unfortunately, that a lot of the wrestlers who were around in 1983 on the WWF roster aren't with us any longer. You know, a lot. And it was tough for us to kind of find, but we got a few, but you know, for some people that were there. But also it's a very complicated story, because it is, you know, going back 35 now 37 years ago, I guess, right? Or is that right? Am I doing my math right? I think so. And so it's like it's tough because it is a story where there was never really any closure on it, even when it happened, and then when it even was brought back 30 years later. The closure on that story never existed. We never got to have that, where there was a witness, or there was somebody who could definitively say, or someone saw something or whatever. So it is a complicated story to tell in that regard, or to even wrap your head around, because you're kind of looking at the evidence that's there, or evidence, or just statements, or whatever, what happened at the time. And so we kind of look at what we can best piece together of what happened in 1983, and then kind of what came to light in 2000, I think it was 13, and kind of pinning those against each other. And then it really is, unfortunately, because of that lack of closure, I mean, you really do have to kind of form your own opinion.
I was going to say, you don't really walk away. You're still guessing. I mean, did it really happen? Did members of Nancy Argentino talk with you guys?
Yeah, we spoke with both of her sisters, Louise and Lorraine, and we worked very, very closely with them. And they were awesome enough to trust us with telling their story, and they never, I believe, spoken about it publicly before. And so I think hearing their side of the story, I think for the first time, it's really valuable, because we never really have heard Nancy's side of the story, and her sisters are, we believe, were the best ones to help tell that story.
Of course. Yeah.
And how were you able to keep that balance, though? Because you're trying to remain objective, to make it so you're telling both sides. Was that difficult, or? But it sounds like you said you're still going to walk away from this not really knowing. It sounds.
Yeah, well, I mean, there are a lot of voices that do balance it out. I mean, you do have kind of the Nancy's or the Argentino family side of the story, because they're the ones that really, pursued charges against him, towards the end of his life. And then you do have Snuka's widow, who was with him for 20 years, or for the last 20 years of his life, I should say. And then you have Don Morocco is in the episode, and he talks about being present at that time period around when that was happening. There's the Tonga Kid tells he was a big defender of Jimmy during the time when the case happened, and he was present around the area when that happened. And then a slew of different journalists that we spoke to for this case, who have covered it in many different ways. And it's dizzying to even talk about, because there's so much information and so much different stories, and things change over the course of as the decades go on, and you really have to kind of rely on the memories of. It's kind of like the Brody story when we did that one. It's you're kind of relying on the memories of wrestlers, 30 plus years ago.
Yeah, and had their head banged.
I wasn't going to say that, but
I mean, that's certainly part of it, and they're older.
It is certainly part of it. It is certainly part of it.
And any person, really, you ask somebody something that happened 30 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
Of course.
But I did want to ask you, how did his fame play into this back then, as far as allowing him, I don't know, a lot of leeway? I mean, a lot of years before it was to a point where they actually looked at this case seriously.
Well, there's a couple different instances where you see it in the case. One is when the police interview Snuka for the first time, the morning after she passes away. You can tell from the police transcripts that they recognize him from television, which is pretty interesting. And a couple other times, there's actually an incident that occurred between Nancy and Jimmy several months prior to when she passed away, when they were at a motel just outside Syracuse, New York. That escalated into kind of a domestic situation. Police were called. Police dogs were called in. Yeah. It's a pretty crazy scene. Yeah. And then from that, basically using his influence as a celebrity, he was basically able to get free from charges by apologizing formally and I think hosting a match locally. He participated in a charity match where he raised money for a Ronald McDonald House and was able to basically get away from because he was charged for assault for that incident towards Nancy, and then your mind starts thinking well, what if those charges stuck? What would happen to her? Yeah. So you just think about those sort of things and how celebrity does play into it. And then of course, Jimmy is the biggest star on the one of if not the biggest star at the time on the roster. And so you have to imagine, protecting the WWF protecting their biggest star in terms of if your biggest star is being charged with murder, that's a big deal. And we got to figure out how we're going to handle that. So there's a lot of different ways in which his celebrity does weave into this story. But I do think, I'll just say this last part. I do think a big part of the story too is, and something that we touch on is that if you look at when this happened in 1983, I also do think one of the things that's tragic about the story is the fact that you're looking at the way kind of how a death of a woman is handled in 1983, someone who was just kind of written off as, oh, this is just this is just his girlfriend or someone coming through our town, and we don't, really, I think that the way that was perceived at the time is so much different than how we would have how we address domestic violence issues today. I was going to say, and I think that again, it's a tragedy of its time as well, and that's a whole nother avenue onto the story. As well. So that's what also makes it so big.
Did he have a documented history of domestic violence prior to that? Is part of this, or no?
I mean, the incident I'm talking about in Syracuse there's that's official documentation of that. Yeah. I mean, that's what happened. And the sad part about that is, that in those police documents is that you actually see a handwritten letter from Nancy Argentino, who's actually absolves him from those charges, where she basically says, he didn't do this to me, he didn't do that, and she's like, oh, he never did this, and you can tell that it's just sad when you see something like that, But there are other people that have come forward, and there were people that were subpoenaed in the grand jury case that had previously been with him that had alleged that behavior. But then again, you talk to someone like Carol Snuka, who was with him for 20 years, and she said that he never laid a hand on me, and he was the sweetest guy of all time. So, it's one of those things where was that just a dark time in his life, or a period in his life? You don't know. We weren't there, but we can use our best judgment in looking at what's on record. Yeah,
it looks like it's going to be up to the viewer's discretion to decide how that one ends. Why do I feel like this one is personal for you guys, even more so when we're talking about the Road Warriors? Because two big favorites of mine, Joe Laurinaitis and Mike Hegstrand, really, when you talk about tag teams, and especially back at the time of their peak, their glory, tag teams were king in wrestling. I mean, there was, they were as up on the card as, a singles match. Why these guys?
Jason, go for it.
Well,
I'll chime in. Tag me in.
I don't think this was necessarily something that was on the list of what the fans were demanding, but Joe, who was Animal, actually came up to Evan, I think, at a convention and
you make the dark side of the ring. That's pretty much what it was, and it was like, you got to do one on the Road Warriors, man. And I was like, definitely.
Yeah, because Evan and I have all, I think, since we were both kids, we were huge fans of the Road Warriors, and probably because we were at that right age when we were kids, that they, unlike any other wrestler, they look like real life action figures.
Yeah.
The actual aesthetic of their makeup.
When they did the bodies, they didn't have to, do the extra little build. You've seen some of these wrestlers he doesn't look like that in person. They did. I mean,
they did.
They look better than the figures.
Oh, they did.
Yeah.
They just look so cool.
Yeah.
And the pop that they get in their entrance when they come out is just it's just the most electrifying feeling. Like I wish I could have been, like I wish I could go back now just to witness what it would have been like in the early '80s, seeing a Road Warriors pop with like the Black Sabbath like track like just like echoing through like an arena. So yeah, for Evan and I, it was like a really big deal. We just got to shoot the reenactments where our costume designer did like an amazing job like creating the pads. And I think like ever since we first came up with the concept of Dark Side of the Ring, we just had this image of like a backlit like hawk and animal like back to back with like a big backlight, you know, with all the light shafts like cutting through their through their spikes. And so yeah, in a big way, it was like this is kind of a way to do a big like puff piece about our favorite like tag team, but also to like let's get really you know, behind this duo. And like now that like Hawk is gone, like how does someone like Animal, whose like identity is like associated with Hawk in this tag team, you know, for life. How do you move on when that side of your identity is gone? And so that was like, you know, the heart of the story. And so yeah, that it's we're really excited about getting that one at the door.
I will say, because I just watched it. I just watched it right before we got on with you, because I was just watching the cut, and it made me laugh because this really does feel like just like us, like, you know, like we love the Road Warriors. We always love the Road Warriors. We collect Road Warriors, everything. Like it's our favorite like aesthetic in wrestling, is that kind of like, you know, like heavy metal, you know, meets wrestling thing. And like I was just laughing because there's like this scene in the episode that we did, which is just like what you'll see. Like, this is why, you know, how much we love this. We like dedicated this whole like sequence to like Joe building the actual pads, you know, where he's like, you know, he's like in his interview, he's just like, yeah, I was in my garage and this guy gave me some spikes and I hammered them into the pads and that's the pads. But like in our reenactments, it's like you just see this scene of like, you know, Joe like putting on a welding mask and like grinding down the spike.
Yeah, we like fetishized the hell out of it. Yeah.
It's the most fetishized version of the Road Warriors story, because it's just like, you know, we just imagine it being this like, you know, like everything taking place in like this Mad Max universe where they're like creating their
that's what's like so cool about the Road Warriors, is because it's like when they come out the door, it's like they bring their universe
with them,
like with them, you know. And so that's what we wanted to do in the episode a little bit artistically. It was just like, let's go into that universe a little bit, like let's lean into that, because it's very, I don't know, in a way like very poetic, like with the Road Warriors.
It is. Yeah.
Well, and you look at those two, really, when they took the scene, they blew the doors off. But people had seen powerful humans in the ring before, but nothing like these guys. You know, I used to be just amazed at how, you know, Mike would pick somebody up.
Yeah.
And people don't know, if you've ever tried to carry a body, it's not like picking up weights, because the weights don't move. You know, the body it's a big sack, and he would pick these guys up like they were nothing, like it was a 10-pound bag of potatoes. And just the human force of them. And, you know, like Joe tells the story, man, when he got his eye, you know, bulged out of his socket, and, you know, who could survive that anyway? And then the next day he's bench pressing 500 pounds, you know.
I know, it's crazy.
And when I think of those guys, really, and Mike especially, because I just loved his voice. You know, that, what a rush, you know, like that.
Well,
and and you know, and then he would go into these, you know, when the you know, lobotomy is happening, the eye socket is, you know, and you know, it's you didn't see people like that and that size who could cut a promo like that. You know, the way I'm glad that I saw them in their prime, because I know when Mike, and I know this becomes part of the dark side, is what happened to him in his spiral. And to hear people and Joe and talking with Joe of how he became weaker, you know, and he wasn't that force. I think would have been just horrific to watch, but what a story. And like you said, it's great what you said that about, you know, with Joe, it's his identity. It will be it's who he is for his life, and that half is gone.
Exactly. Yeah.
What a
yeah,
story.
it's like it's really interesting too. It's like you were saying, Hawk's performance and his persona is just so larger than life. It's so energetic, and as a kid, like, and even up until recently, all I've ever seen really of Hawk is him as Hawk, you know.
Yeah.
And then when we like interviewed like guys like Scott Norton and like Nikita Koloff and Eddie Sharkey and when all these guys like start talking about Hawk, aka Mike, the real person, they start like tearing up. Like
it's a very emotional episode. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, how funny he was too.
Yeah.
He like touched a lot of lives, and you can tell like he really cared about people around him, like the people who were close to him.
Totally.
Yeah.
Oh boy. Okay. Well, I'll move on from there. But that was another one I got on the top of, I'd say, my top three. So I can't wait to see that one.
Very cool.
The one with Herb Abrams, though, I think is a cautionary tale. I don't know, but this had to be a fascinating hour to put together, and I don't know if it is pasted together. But tell me about this and how you guys decided that Herb Abrams was going to be a great subject.
First off, I'll just say, like, I didn't really know anything about the Herb Abrams story until we started like diving into it, and the whole time at first it was like, when it was being pitched to me, I was like, really? Like, I never really heard of this guy.
Yeah.
But then when we started researching him more and more, it was just became more unbelievable. And by the end of it, like,
it's still going. The rabbit hole is still.
Yeah. And like we were doing the interviews, and like after doing the reenactments that we just shot for it, it's like the most like twisted, weirdest. Like, there was stuff that we shot that like even I was uncomfortable with.
I know.
Really?
But we have
give us a little uncomfortableness
to the story. We have to try and tell the truth, you know. But
like, this really happened. Okay, I guess.
Well, set it up for those, because I think set it up for people. There are a lot of them that don't know his story.
Yeah, this is going to be. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
No, but lay it out a little bit of why people should want to watch this one.
Yeah, so the story of Herb Abrams and the UWF. So Herb Abrams was a mega fan of wrestling. He was at the first WrestleMania as a fan. He was a huge wrestling fan, and he was independently wealthy from basically running these, plus size girl. Like, he basically ran a plus size clothing store for women called I'm a Big Girl Now. And he took the money he made from that to kickstart his own wrestling federation. And he's kind of one of these types of characters we see in history with someone who's just a big dreamer, who feels like, I'm going to do it and I can do it. And I have the wherewithal to do this. And essentially he started doing kind of what what WCW did, but kind of before, so he got his own television deal, not on the same level as, TNT or whatever. And then he started getting all of the WWF talent that was of yesteryear. He started getting all these people to come in and to kind of be part of his upstart company.
Yeah, it helped give him some legitimacy. He got like Bruno Sammartino.
He did play-by-play with them.
Williams.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And so and his dream was essentially to compete with Vince McMahon. That was the idea. He really wanted to take down Vince. I mean, he wanted to be the new wrestling outfit in town. But it just didn't happen that way. And the train never even got rolling. Basically, the train just fell apart and all the parts came loose, right out of the gate. And it's just one of these kind of spectacular kind of downfall stories, but it's also kind of this story about a dreamer and a guy who really wanted to, had these lofty goals of wanting to create this company. And then all the people that believed in that dream, all the people that kind of got seduced by that dream and went along with that dream, and some people who had to suffer the consequences of that dream. And then some people like Mick Foley, which is a very interesting part of the story, because Mick Foley joins us for this one, which is because he really cut his teeth there at the UWF. Uh-huh. And Mick really got to find himself kind of there. Like he had come out of WCW where he was wearing handcuffs, and then there was no UWF. You could basically do what you wanted to do, and he really kind of found his persona in that way. So for some people it worked, and some people it kind of was the beginning of the end for them. But then also, Herb Abrams kind of goes down in history as having one of the more sensational passings of anyone in the wrestling business or otherwise. And so, and there's a whole and that's like a legend unto itself that we try and peel away.
A lot of Vaseline was involved in cocaine and a few,
correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
A cautionary tale to say the least. And I don't know what the span of that was. What was the span? How long did the UWF actually exist for? It wasn't long, was it?
Yeah, it's weird because it was very like patchy. It was very stop and start. It was like they would they like got their television deal and they had like a year of TV, and then that didn't happen, so now we'll try pay-per-view. And then like that really was a failure, so then let's like regroup for a year and then come back. So it was very patchy, and I think it pretty much was like on and off from like 1989, 1990 to about 96, somewhere around in there.
Yeah. Well, you got me. I'm in.
It's going to be a really good one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the last one that we'll be talking about is Owen Hart, and I think that's kind of a great way to wrap this up as far as the episodes go, because I can't think of a worse tragedy. Not just because I got the opportunity to work with Owen, and just what a great person he was. Yeah. But I can't, and I still think about it when I hear the story. I'm like, God, 80 feet. I mean, could he have just landed in the ring and it's a cushion? There's a spring. Could that? Why could that have to happen to somebody like him? And like, how did he end up there in that harness? It's just the whole story is just incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Going back to the episodes that fans wanted to see the most. Yeah. And that was right up at the top. And, it's one of the stories that it was like, the only way that we could ever, in a million years do this story is if we have the support and the participation, of Martha Hart, his widow and their family, because it's their story in a lot of ways, and in all ways. And so that was like, if that happens, then we can do it, or then we will do it. And so that was kind of that was what it all kind of came down to. But, we were lucky enough that, when we did meet and we did come together, Martha and I, that, and also Jason, and that she agreed and wanted to participate and wanted to do this. And wanted to tell this story, which was great. And the whole thing was basically just sending her an email out of the blue. Here we are. We have this TV show. We really want to do this story, but we're only going to do it if you want to do it. Mm-hmm. And then she sent me back this email that just was one of the most thoughtful replies I've ever got, which was just like asking me these 10 questions of just like kind of information about me, our show, our background, and where we come from, and what we want to do, and how we want to tell it. And she's like, take your time answering this. And I did. And I spent like weeks like putting all my thoughts and leading with my heart and trying to put all my thoughts down and get it there and send it to her. And then she really wanted to meet. And so I flew out to Calgary, and we sat down and we had pizza, me, her, and her son Oj, and we had pizza for like 4 hours or something, and we just had an amazing time. And I was just taken aback by how cool they were. They're so cool. They're such great people, and so funny too, and just really, really, really great people. And so then we just really hit it off, and I think we really built something there. And then we were kind of right off to the races after that, kind of shooting with them and filming with them and getting their story down. And it's just it's very It's gonna be have your tissues close by for this one for sure.
Really?
It's a heavy one.
Yeah.
It's a hard one. Yeah.
Did Brett join this episode? Did you get Brett to talk to you?
So unfortunately, we did not. Brett he's talked about it before. Brett wasn't crazy about the Montreal Screwjob episode that we did last year, and so we obviously want Brett to be involved in this episode. I mean, he should be involved in this episode, and we reached out to him to be a part of it because we thought that he should. I mean, he obviously should, and he didn't get back to us. So that's basically where it was left.
Well, and I think you guys, dealing with this, that the history of the Hart family, and it is, I don't know, tenuous, I guess, to say the least.
Complicated.
Really, especially over the years. And this Owen's death tore them apart.
Yes.
Because that went on for a long time between the settlement and then other factions. Yeah, I don't know how much you get into it in the story, but it really is a fascinating family for one thing, and then the story that how we lost Owen. I mean, it's still, when you think about it, how freakish that happened. That's how he died.
I will say,
of his career.
I will also just add on to that too. I remember it when it happened, because I was a huge fan at the time, and I remember seeing it on the pay-per-view broadcast and it being such a topic in school the next day, and thinking about all the years later now we have the show, and are we gonna cover this story, and thinking about, I remember the first time thinking about that, taking that, are we gonna do this, and thinking about how are we gonna do this. And it was right around the time last year, or I think it was last year, when it was the 20th anniversary of that tragic event, and how people were kind of republishing stories and doing new editorial pieces on it. There were a couple of really great podcasts that had come out. Jim Ross did a phenomenal thing with Conrad, and there was another piece that came out through Post Wrestling. They did this amazing radio documentary about it. And that's when really the first time for me, just about a year ago, when I really got to hear Martha's side of the story, and then going through her book, and then I've subsequently read her book, and going to finding out what their side of the story is. Because as a wrestling fan, you kind of live in a little bit of a wrestling bubble from what you know about it. And then now going through their family side of the story and finding out what are the events that took place leading up to that moment is really sobering to look at. And so that, for us, it was so important to get, because nobody knows that story better than she does. In terms of all the research and everything that she did, and she's had to endure and go through. And I couldn't even believe, one of the aspects of the story that I couldn't believe is I couldn't believe that she walked those steps that Owen took, his last steps. She went back to Kemper Arena, and she had to go up to the catwalk, and she had to walk those steps to see what he had gone through. And that was just, I can't imagine that. I can't imagine that. Yeah.
Must have torn you apart to do that. Another thing that you make, and I think is a great point, whether or not you're trying to make it or not, but and I found this with Diana Hart, Davey Boy Smith's wife, that not that they haven't gone on with their lives. I don't want to say that they've moved forward. They've raised their children, but the identity, their identity of how they were with that person, and then to have them just kind of ripped from their lives, whether it still hasn't gone away. And I don't know if you found that with Martha, but I know with Diana, and like I said, I'm not saying in a way that they haven't been able to, but it just shows you. And even Joe Laurinaitis with someone like with Mike, that I don't know, they're just bigger than life personalities, or they were so connected to who they were. I don't know, what is your perspective on that and what you witnessed with it?
Well, one thing I will say just real quick on that is, my experience with Martha is that she's one of the strongest people that I've met, I think, in terms of everything that she's had to deal with this story and having to overcome. And she tells a very amazing part of the story, which is when she finds out, the moment that she finds out that her husband has died, she has this moment in her life where she realizes that she has these two paths that she can pick. One being total destruction, everything's ruined, everything's gone, everything's over, or the other path of rebuilding, and that's the path that she's always taken, and she's always, that's the path she's always tried to live by, and then to see what she has done in Owen's name since, in terms of that, in terms of building the Owen Hart Foundation, opening schools all over the world, and helping raise money for education, and supporting causes that Owen believed in, and things like that, and also her perseverance for justice and perseverance for holding those accountable for what had happened as well. It's like, she's just a ball of fire in that way, in terms of and always moving forward, and not letting it be the thing that ultimately destroys her, and that to me has always been like, I mean, obviously it's really hard, and it's like the worst thing you can possibly be dealt with, but just to see her strength in that, to me, just as on a human level, was just incredibly inspiring,
Yeah, that was like, I think, like, one big thing I took away from it too, is because we deal with a lot of topics with people who've lost like loved ones in their life, and how the grieving like process works for them. But I learned a lot about the grieving process from Martha, and just her perspective on it was just very informative. Like Evan was saying, like, I don't want to spoil too much, but
can I just spoil stuff? Sorry.
Well, when she retraces his steps on that day and walked up onto the catwalk, the same one Owen did, she took her two kids along for that as well too.
Yeah.
Really?
And at first I was like, wow, that's like, that would be really scary as a kid. And Oj, his son, Owen's son Oj, told us, for him, that was really important because it erased, like, didn't erase, but like, it took a lot of doubt away from him, so that for him, like, growing up and for his grieving process, there would be like less questions about like, just like, what was that like for his dad, and like, retracing his steps, and just like kind of visually piecing it all together, so that some of those questions could be like answered. And I thought, wow, that's like really powerful. Like, it's a really hard thing. It must have been so hard to go through. But it really, I think, like, made them so much stronger. So yeah,
and also understanding the risks that their father took for them as a family.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Yeah. Well, and I'll tell you guys that, and I'm sure I'm going to feel the same way about this season, is, it is about wrestling, the core of it, but there are life lessons throughout your stories that, I mean, that, like you just said, you're going to learn something about, first of all, character, perseverance, what these guys went through, and the people that helped make them, and were a part of their lives that you never got to, ever know about. And really, there's life lessons in this. And I'm really looking forward to it. I got a few questions for you, not a bunch, but I would love to throw a few at you that we've sifted through here, and it's comes off right after this, with the subject we've had here. But William Chevezian on Facebook says, and I don't know if you've got something to add to this. How were you able to get Martha Hart to cooperate with this? Maybe Jason, you have a different perspective on that process. I know that Evan was talking about going through that letter and being very thoughtful about, but what do you remember?
No, that like, because we spent a lot of time like working on that letter, and that was like, that was just really cool, because none of our guests ever put us to a test like that before. And that was like a really like interesting, I wouldn't say challenge, but it was like, for us, it also helped us to
find what story we wanted to tell.
For us in our hearts too, to like, what is the story we want to tell? How do we want to tell it? And so I think like when she met Evan first, and like they connected, and she saw like, how, we wanted to tell the story, and how we could help like guide her and her family through telling their story. But when I first met her, it was awesome. Like when she came, we flew her and Oj her son Oj to Toronto. And like I said, I'm from Halifax, Nova Scotia, and Oj went to school in Halifax as well too. And I didn't know that Owen and his family had like this huge affection for Nova Scotia. And
Oh, really?
I realized when I saw when the like his gravestone has like this little lighthouse on it. And I was like, oh, that's like super interesting. Like, where's that from? And so I asked her when I first met her, and she said, oh, it was from this lighthouse in Nova Scotia that her and Owen loved, and this place called Peggy's Cove. And she actually, with the Owen Hart Foundation, had a replica of that lighthouse built in Calgary, like on a lake in Calgary, which is like incredible. But the story, there's a story that goes along with the lighthouse in Peggy's Cove that like kind of has some I don't know, it has some similarities to her story as well too, which I found very interesting. But yeah, it's another story.
Well, and it sounds like that letter helped you guys because probably in a way when you stepped into the filming, you knew that in a way she chose you to do it and had you had her trust.
Yeah.
All right, Ian J.
Really cool,
Ian J says anybody that you and I was going to bring this up early, but I love this question. Anybody you really wanted to interview but couldn't get, or an episode you abandoned for the lack of interviews. I don't think that is the case, but there had to be some that you really wanted. I'm sure Brett was one of them, as you mentioned, but how about some others?
Yeah, I'll start off with one we really wanted, but no one in the world seems to know how to get a hold of this person, was Mr. T for our David Schultz episode. We tried so hard to get a hold of Mr. T, and he seems to be completely off the grid.
Untraceable. Off the grid. That's a good answer, though, because we get asked that. We get asked that a lot, and I forgot about that. But yeah, Mr. T, that was like a whole like, where in the world is Mr. T?
We tried
global search going on. Yeah.
Anybody you think of, Evan, that you wanted to get?
Man, 87 interviews. It's a blur. Is there anyone, Jason, I'm forgetting?
We really wanted to get Hawk's ex-wife, who we also couldn't track down.
Well, widow.
Sorry,
Dale. Couldn't find you, Dale. Tried.
Yeah.
How about guys that you did get and just turned out to be tremendous guests? I mean, you talk about New Jack. You said that he's great, but any others that really stand out? You're like, holy shit, that was just awesome. You know, like
for me, there's this in the New Jack episode. There's this wrestler who goes by the name of Tiny the Terrible, who just had like a short career. He's a small person wrestler from Long Island. Was that where we filmed?
No, he's from it was in Rhode Island.
Oh, Rhode Island. Sorry, Rhode Island. Yeah.
Different island, bud.
We've been all over the continent. But he was a really interesting interview, and I think people are going to be quite surprised when they see his interview and his involvement with the New Jack story, particularly the mass transit story that we talked about earlier. But when we went to his apartment, he had, I think, close to 200 action figures that he had made himself. And they were beautiful. He created this whole universe that he called this like ghetto altered universe. And it was really strange and really like it was like
made a separate documentary about that whole trip.
I would have loved to. It was really fascinating.
One for me that was especially amazing was Paul Ellering. Was really good. Paul Ellering. It's not often that it like a subject will make me cry. Paul Ellering made me cry. Like
really?
his whole I won't go. I don't want to spoil the moment. I'll say like when he goes into talking about finding out when Hawk passed and what he did afterwards and how symbolic that was just like, man, what an amazing human being. And and that made me like literally tear up and cry in the moment. Yeah. And one thing we forgot to mention about the Road Warriors story is that I'm actually from Minneapolis. So for me too, it was like this coming home story, and it's the only episode in all of both seasons that we shot everything in one place. So we brought everyone back to Minnesota, and we shot it in Minnesota. So it was a very personal episode.
Go to Robbinsdale?
Yeah, we went around Robbinsdale and North Minneapolis and all around. Yeah, definitely. And it was just so cool. But Paul Ellering was great. Great.
Wow.
Yeah.
Can't wait to hear that.
Yeah.
This is something a lot of people wonder. B on Twitter says, "What's the relationship with the WWE regarding using their footage, trademarks, etc.? How did that relationship go?" I know that last time around, it's a good relationship, isn't it, or is it not?
It's well, I mean, we basically don't have any relationship. It is we're just covering these stories journalistically, and that affords you the ability to showcase certain footage in certain ways when you're illustrating points and you're making certain points in a journalistic way, and that's a huge part of our show. So we're totally objective. There's no relationship, and we're just covering these stories on the outside.
Mm-hmm. So I mean, did you have to purchase footage though from them that you use, or how did that work?
No, it's just like any other sort of fair use situation in terms of illustrating points journalistically that we do in our show.
Yeah, and we like use it.
Very strategic answer. Very good.
Well, I mean, hey, I'm not kayfabe in here.
Yeah. All right, let's see. Petrick Darji on Facebook says, what's your guys' favorite era of wrestling? Are you 80s and 90s?
For me, I guess it would be the 80s because I grew up in the 80s. And I have a huge affection for it. It's why I'm here. It's why I'm a part of the show, is because of that upbringing of growing up with wrestling in the 80s. And that was in a lot of ways how Evan and I connected through our friendship, was for our mutual love of wrestling growing up. We both loved it so much. And I think in our older years, especially for me, as I'm a filmmaker, and I love telling stories, and I love trying to track down where my own artistic aesthetics come from. And I did kind of a little research project on myself where I wanted to find out why do I like certain things, why do I like the things I like. And so I started diving back into my childhood and trying to understand the things that I liked and how that helped shape my perspective. And I realized wrestling had a huge part of shaping my creative perspective on things. Even to, this may sound ridiculous, but even to the point of color combinations, how the WWE used to use color combinations when they were designing costumes for the wrestlers. They would use color combinations that really would attract kids.
Lime green, orange.
So even to this day, when I see a certain pigment of yellow and red go together, my mind instantly goes to Hulk Hogan. It worked really effectively.
Yeah, that's what you call marketing, boy.
So I apply that thinking to all my work as well too, and all the costume designing, and even the recreations that we do on this as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I just as a kid, that yellow stripe down Big Boss Man's pants.
Yeah,
that's when I close my eyes, I see that. That's a very particular yellow stripe.
And Randy Savage had his own fashion line. People don't give him enough credit.
No. Yeah, and that's the thing too. I'll say too is and it really works in our favor. Is most wrestlers from that era, in the 80s especially, because their gimmicks were so heightened, is that you could just see their silhouette. You could just see the silhouette and you would know who they are.
I know.
And that's when you have really good designs,
icons,
and creating iconic characters. And so for us, when we do the recreations, we literally just have to show. We have to kind of create that silhouette,
And that does it.
and that will instantly people's minds like. And
Okay, so we got a lot of folks who listen in the UK, and they're big fans of the program. The question here from Danny McCourt on Twitter wants to know any news regarding the UK release date.
Yeah, they are going to announce it, I think, shortly. And I hear that it's going to be, it might not be until like early June, but that's the rumor. That's the rumor. Oh, it's definitely coming. Yeah. It's definitely coming. But that is the rumor I heard.
Okay, and boy, I think this is going to be a tough question for you guys. Nick McDonald wants to know which episode you're looking forward to most. I mean, I think it really comes down to do you guys have a favorite episode each?
Oh, it's hard to say. I think we're very proud of the Benoit episode.
Yeah,
because we led into the season with that episode, and it was a very emotional process, and
it's the biggest undertaking we've done of any story, I think. Like, fully, like, and it's just like it just feels like, we put so much into all of our stories. Like, I'm not gonna say that, but like just in terms of the undertaking of the resources that it required and everything, and all the research and the different voices and we put, I feel like, the most into it. Like, it demanded the most of us.
And you feel you told the story? You were happy with that you did tell the story?
Yeah. I do feel really happy with the way that it in totality. It's not an easy story. It's definitely not an easy journey. It's a hard one, but once you get through to the other side of it, there is strands of positivity to take out of it and things you can learn from it. As difficult as the story is to revisit again for those who remember it so vividly, but I think it's the one that I'm most proud of, I think.
And of course, this is coming, and you're always thinking ahead. Season 3. Will we see a season 3? Has that green light come on yet?
I feel like we need to sleep for a year first.
Like, come on, Mooney. Jeez, do you have to ask us that now? Let me ask you this: can you at least go lay down on an island, a deserted one, because you can't be around anybody?
I know. Oh my God! I actually just forgot about everything for a little bit.
I did, yeah.
Yeah, it's great.
I don't know. I mean, there's definitely, seriously. There's definitely stories that I would still love to do. I'll put that out there. There are stories that I still think I would love to do. If there was a way to, it's not the easiest show to make. Especially it was tough. I'm not going to bring out the small violin for everybody, but just that it's a tough show to make with all the travel, the amount of time we had. We basically had the same size team, and we did twice the amount of episodes in the same amount of time we did half the amount of episodes last year. So
wow.
This year was just was I thought it would get easier, and it didn't get easier.
We haven't taken a day off this whole year.
We haven't taken not one weekend.
We've been working straight through the weekends to try and meet deadlines.
So,
it's 10 documentaries.
Yeah,
and we're perfectionists.
People do them like one a year. I mentioned my friend Joe Levine when he was with HBO. He had like a year. I'm like, what?
Yeah. No, it's 10 documentaries, and we are perfectionists. Yeah. So we have to we have to make them we have to be fans of them. Like, we have to love these things. So it takes a lot. Yeah.
And my last question, guys, how has doing this series impacted you? Because just talking to you, I could tell that it's changed you in ways, and also what you've learned along the road. How has the series impacted both of you?
I've put on about 30 pounds.
All that junk food, late night dinners.
No, I mean, it's a thing I think about a lot. Like, there are, and this is true. This is 100% true. Like, there are times when I'm traveling on the road, and especially during some of the more emotionally difficult episodes, I'll come home or I'll come back to the hotel room and I'll have like a emotional moment to myself, and just kind of be like, wow, like just from being surrounded by and interviewing a lot of people who've gone through so many hard and difficult things, and it's just it is a wild experience, and having to interview people and hear their stories, and it does affect you in some ways. I'm not saying like it's bad or anything. I'm just saying it's a big emotional experience making the show sometimes. And like I said, we are perfectionists, and so we push a lot of people and we push ourselves so hard in order to do this because we want it to be the best it can be. And sometimes that just is, you're just asking for a huge load of stress when you're doing things like that. So
yeah. I try to, like, it's because we're working on the show like 24/7. It's like times I'm like, man, like I don't have a life. Like I don't get to see my girlfriend and my family. But I realize too, it's like my life is like it's spending time with these people, like our subjects, and I'm learning so much from them. Like
yes.
the time I spent with David Schultz just for like 2 days, like I just learned so much from him, and same with Martha. Like I was saying, like just how much I learned about grief and like about life and how to process like a tragedy. So if like a tragedy ever like came into my life, like I think she helped me just be better equipped maybe emotionally for it, so
yeah,
like I'm learning a lot from the people that we're spending time with, and it like we before this we worked in like the feature film world where you get to write a story and you make up a story and then you film it and you put it out in the world and there's no consequences to it really other than like it's a story that you've made up and you put it out there. But with these, it's like there's so much emotional responsibility and there's a lot of responsibility on us to like tell these stories, and we are very aware of that, and that weighs like very heavily like on us
all the time.
So it's all we're learning a lot and still living life through the process of making the show.
Yeah. And how about just the accomplishment, guys? I know when we first chatted the first time around about, here you're just kind of like pitching a story, and then they kind of said, well, okay, go do one. And then here you are, almost 15 episodes done. Just, the accomplishment of what you've been able to do.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, it's something that I will be able to, I think, for me, fully understand and appreciate, like when it's all done. When it's all done and I can but it's still like, again, because the fact that on Tuesday our show goes on the air and we still have episodes to finish, so the pressure is still really real for us both, knowing that we have more episodes to finish and we only have so many weeks, and so but the response we get from people, especially this time around, like when the trailer came out, or whatever it was last week, and just seeing the excitement that people have for this season and the subjects that we're covering and everything, like that's definitely keeps us going. Like you like forget about that sometimes when you're in the middle of it, and then people who are so eager to see what you've put together and want to do, like that's just so reassuring, and it gets me to keep fighting.
Yeah, because like last season we finished the show and then it was like months before it like aired, and like there was all this uncertainty and we didn't know like when it was going to air, if it was going to air,
people are
and so there was a lot of time to kind of process everything after we finished the show. This I'm like coming onto this show like feeling like I still have yet to like process everything. Like I still don't even know like really how to talk about everything yet, in a way, because we're still so thick in it. Like I've been living the Jimmy Snuka story in an edit for like 2 weeks now, and so that's like where my mind is. Like I'm trying to immerse myself like in each story as much as I can, So it's it's much different now. The show is coming out at the same time as we're finishing
it.
episodes.
It's surreal.
Yeah.
Well, guys, I can't wait. I can't wait to see it. And folks, you cannot miss this series. It's fantastic.
Thank you.
I'm glad I got you guys before it premiered, which is happening the 24th, March 24th, which is Tuesday, and I believe this episode is dropping the day before. So you out there. It's on Vice TV. If you don't have it, it is worth maybe a couple of bucks, but you should get it because it's going to be well worth seeing all these episodes. The first one featuring Chris Benoit and his story. But guys, thank you so much for coming on, and really, I can't wait to see the stories.
Thank you. Wow,
thank you,
thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Say what I tell you. Wasn't that fascinating? Almost 2 hours with those guys, and wow. If that doesn't make you want to watch that series, man, I don't know what. If you're a professional wrestling fan, and there's many of those personalities that you watched growing up, it's just fascinating. They did a lot of work, as you could tell that Jason's just exhausted, and so is Evan. But they did some fantastic work, and I'm really looking forward to seeing that. Folks, like I said, I hope you're taking care of yourselves. I don't know what many of you are doing for entertainment, but if you've got some hours to kill, and we hope we can entertain you, go back in the library. There's some other episodes I'm sure that you haven't listened to yet, and some of your favorite personalities, and their stories are just fascinating and inspirational. I hope that you'll take the time to do that. I'd love to hear from you. Let me know how you're doing. I just had a Facebook Live this past weekend. A lot of our loyal listeners checked in, and I feel the same way about you. Please look after one another, and we'll have another great episode coming your way next week. Till then, I'm Sean Mooney, and I am out.